What is up everyone, Jeremy here. In this video we are going to walk through the entire mix for a song I put together for the first ever monthly mix. Interested in monthly mix? Well, this is a brand new learning platform I recently launched on my website. I will put a link down below. Definitely go check that out if you are interested in learning mixing or just practicing mixing to up your mixing game. Each month we will have a brand new song to mix, and like I mentioned, the very first one featured a song that I put together in collaboration with Joey Munson, who helped with the vocals. So what we're gonna do in this video is just walk through the entire mix for the reference track, and let's just get right to it. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is just have a listen to the entire song. It's not very long, but that way if you haven't heard it before, maybe you haven't done the monthly mix, you have a chance to hear it. So let's have a listen. All right, so that is the entire song. So now let's take a look at the mix and how I put everything together. And we're gonna start with the routing. And it all kind of starts right here with the main bus. So we have main, and then from there, we have these three. We have the instrument main, the effects main, and the vocals main. And those three route into the main bus. And then we also have a stereo width bus. This also goes then to instrument main, which of course then goes into main. And then after the stereo width bus, we have the drums bus, guitars, bass, effects, synth, and vocal buses. And you can see these all route to their corresponding bus here. So this one, the guitars, the drums, guitars, and bass go to instrument main. Then we have the effects bus, which goes to effects main. And then vocals bus, the effects and synth go to effects main, then the vocals bus goes to the Vox main. And that's so kind of the high level routing, if you will. All right, so now looking at the actual mixing that took place here in each of these buses, starting with main, you can see we have the test oscillator, and this is just basically generating a sine wave at 360 hertz. And the reason for that, and the reason it's bypassed, is because it's only a calibration tool, because I have the next thing that's in here is an I/O plugin. And this is routing out to slots 1 and 2 in my Cranborne 500 lunchbox chassis thing here. And what's in slots 1 and 2 are 2 API preamps, and that's to route the entire mix out through these preamps to get some analog vibe and color and width and size out of this mix. So that is going out to actual hardware and then coming back in. And because of that, I have to calibrate it. So that's the I/O plugin. And then we go into the SPL iron, and this is just for leveling. You can see I've kind of got a medium slow attack and medium slow release. Again, it's just for leveling. I think the max this hit is about 1 dB, if that. It's mainly hovering around a half a dB, and we'll just kind of take a look here real quick where a lot of the instruments come in back here. I mean, you can see right there, it's kind of hovering at about a half a dB. And it goes up a little bit more than that periodically, but it's not a fast attack. It's a slow, gradual thing just to kind of level the entire mix off. So that's main. Now before that, we have instrument main, and there's only two things happening in here. And we have a little bit of EQ happening and some compression. And so you can see we have at about 15K and up, we're using a high shelf at 15K. We're boosting about 4 dB. And then a low shelf starting at about 80 Hertz, and we're boosting about just a little bit over a half a dB there. So adding some bottom end, adding some top end air across the entire instrument bus. And then from there, we're doing one of my favorite compressors, the Shadow Hills Mastering Compressor Class A. We're doing mainly optical compression here with a touch of the VCA. And we'll just take a look, and the left side is the optical, the right side is the VCA, so you can see how much gain reduction is happening here. So it's looking like the optical is compressing about 1 dB, whereas the VCA is doing about a half a dB. So this just kind of adds some nice vibe. It helps rein in any extra transients like the snare and the kick. And I'll bypass it real quick so you can hear the difference. You can hear immediately how when I bypass it, especially this snare kind of gets boxy. It loses a little bit of that punch. So this really kind of, it's not doing a lot, but you can easily hear how that's lost when I turn it off. Now looking back from these two here, the effects main and the vocal main, we're just using the Townhouse bus compressor from Plugin Alliance. Neither of these is doing a ton. It's just very, very, very minor bits of compression, just to kind of, again, somewhat of a leveling thing. It's not even worth really showing. They're both maxing, absolute max at maybe half a dB to 1 dB, so it's not much. And then we have the stereo width bus. I have an entire video on this. I will link to that up here. So if you are interested in seeing the settings and why I do this or how I use this, go watch that video. It's all there. So I'm gonna skip over that because this is gonna be a long video. So here we are, drums. This is the drums bus, and I'll go ahead and pull these up. We have the SSL bus compressor and a limiter, just to make sure no harsh peaks or transients come cutting through and cause my main bus compressor or the instrument bus compressor to pump like crazy. So we'll just kind of take a look at what's happening here. Yeah, not much. I'm seeing maybe about 1 dB of gain reduction on this bus compressor on the drums, and we've just kind of got the safety net at negative 5.33 dB on this limiter just to make sure nothing breaks across that threshold there. And then we have the guitar bus. There's nothing on the guitar bus. And then we have the bass bus, and I think mainly that you're seeing a lot of stuff on here because I do a fair amount on the bus here for my tone. We'll just take a look at what's going on here. So the very first thing is we're adding some saturation. Looks like we're mainly saturating at about 263 Hertz and up using warm tape at about 85%, about half the mix in there. That's Saturn. Then we're doing some dynamic dipping here around where some of the, I believe this is coming from, let's see, what am I side chaining to? The kick, okay. So what we're doing is we're cutting out around 53 Hertz with this bell curve you can see here when the kick hits. So this is triggering whenever the kick hits, we're dropping these low frequencies out of the bass so that the kick can have that low frequency to kind of drive. So that's all that's happening on the bass bus there for the EQ. Low control, so this is a fantastic plugin. It helps rein in these low frequencies that may get out of control. I have an easy to set threshold with this compressor here, and I tell it what to compress and below. So everything 90 Hertz and below, it's compressing at this threshold. And then the enhance adds some harmonic saturation to this frequency here and below that roughly, where that helps cut through on smaller speakers. And it actually kind of adds a nice fat sound overall. So we'll listen to this before and after. Yeah, I can hear how the low end gets much more controlled when that compressor comes in, and it gets a little bit fatter as well with the enhance. So that's what's happening there. And then we're doing some BSA clipper. This is also from Black Salt Audio. Just to kind of clip the bass a little bit here, again, add a little bit of harmonic saturation with the clipping. Yeah, you can really kind of hear that in like the upper mids and kind of on the clank. So that's the bass bus, and we're sending this to the stereo width bus here just to kind of add some stereo width, right? So I'll turn this on and off. You can really hear the difference. It's just night and day, that one. You know, I turn on the stereo width bus that we're sending this bass bus to, and it just gets huge and wide and just, I love it. It's so great. Really opens up the entire bass and pulls it just kind of out of the mono space, which the low end is obviously being controlled in the mono. And again, if you go watch the stereo width video, you'll see how that's happening. From there, we have the effects bus, and we're just doing some SSL compression here. And then the synth bus, same thing, SSL compression. We're sending this to the stereo width as well. And then the vocal bus, kind of running through what we've got going on here. I'll just pull it all up and then we'll walk through it. This is my vocal bus. And the order is the Mag EQ4 here, then the de-esser, then the Waves vocal rider, then the Purple Audio MC77. So what we're doing here with the Mag Audio, we're adding some serious top end air to these vocals, really clearing things up there and adding some air. So we've got the 40 Hertz band and we're boosting up around 5.5 dB. We're boosting up 2.5K, 1 dB, pulling back kind of the muddy frequencies of around 650 by 2.5. Boosting up a little bit of the low end, just kind of adding a little bit of beef to the vocals here at about 0.5 dB, pulling back 40 Hertz, 0.5 dB, and just pulling back the sub frequencies like 3 dB. I could probably pull it all the way down. You wouldn't hear much of a difference because there's not much down that low anyways, but let's just see what this sounds like before and after on these vocals. So I'm gonna solo the vocals and before and after the Mag.
God, for what you have done, no salvation.
Yeah, night and day, right? Like, so when we pull out a lot of that 650 Hertz, we're losing that mid-range mud in the vocals, and then we get a lot of that bite from this top-end air, especially when on these harsh vocals, it really helps those cut through. So that's the Mag, and obviously we're just de-essing here. You can kind of see what's happening here. It's about around 3 or 4K is when it starts, and then it kind of fades up to 20K, and that's all we're really doing there is just some de-essing. Now, this is Waves vocal rider, and this is similar to a compressor. It's kind of an expander in compressor. You can have it upwards compress or expand the audio or downwards. And the way that I have it set up right now is it will go up as much as 1.5 dB if the audio volume is low, and then it will compress or pull down the volume as much as -5 dB if the audio gets too loud. And so this just really helps level things off across what's a very dynamic bus, which is the vocal bus. Things kind of tend to jump around. So this goes in front of the compressor just to kind of help level things off so the compressor doesn't have to do quite as much work. And then you can see we've got this 76 style compressor, the MC77. On the fastest attack and fastest release settings, you can see we're pushing the input, I don't know, maybe about, what is this, like 16 or so. And that's basically it there. There's nothing else going on. We're using a ratio of 4, and we'll just kind of take a look at what kind of gain reduction is happening, and you can watch Vocal Rider as well.
God, for what you have done, no salvation. For what you have done. God, for what you have done, no salvation. For what you have done.
Yeah, you can really see how when those are off, it gets much more like all over the place. The volumes are jumping all over the place. Turn these on, it's very reined in and controlled. So those are all of the instrument buses. We're gonna go ahead and start diving into the tracks now, starting with the drums. All right, so let's go ahead and have a look at the drum tracks. And the first thing we're gonna do is actually look at some of the additional buses and routing that is tucked away underneath my drum bus here. So this is in a folder, which is the drums bus. Within that, we have the Shells bus, we have a Cymbals bus, we have the Kick Sum Bus, and then the Kick Reverb. the Snare Sum Bus and the Snare Reverb, the Tom's Sum Bus, Tom's Verb, and the Room's Sum Bus. So those are kind of all the buses and the sends that I have going on here. And then from there we have the actual tracks. And you can just kind of see, I'll scroll through them here. So this is the individual tracks. So with that, let's take a look at the buses first. So starting with the shells, the very first thing I have here, and let me solo this, is the fantastic SSL drum strip plugin. And the only thing I'm using in this, which is the same on the Cymbals Bus, is the low frequency enhancer, high frequency enhancer, and the listen mic compressor. So let's go ahead and do an A/B on this. Massive difference, and a lot of that is really coming from this listen mic compressor right here, which is outstanding. So I'll A/B this with just the listen mic compressor and listen to the difference. I mean, that is just fantastic. So quickly, the settings we've got going on here, we're blending in the low frequency enhancer at about 16%. You can see I'm just gonna kind of hover over those so you can read them. We're blending in the high frequency enhancer at less than 8%. It's not, I don't want a lot of high frequencies on the shell here, on the shells. That's really kind of used in the cymbals, which we'll get to in just a second. We have the listen mic compressor at about 40%, boosting 7.3 dB, and that's blended in at about 46%. And overall, this entire plugin, everything that's happening is only blending in at 65%. So that is the drum shells. Now looking at the cymbals, you can see we're not doing much on the low frequency enhancer, but we're doing quite a bit on the high frequency enhancer, really kind of driving this at 6. The kilohertz here is at 7,700 kilohertz. Then we're blending in at about 34%. So listen to the difference in this. It is insane how good this sounds on cymbals. So I'm going to turn this off. I'll just do the whole A/B. I'm going to turn the drum strip off, and then I'll turn it on and listen to the difference. I mean, it's just incredible. The high frequency enhancer on this, that saturation that it adds, it is so crisp and so beautiful. And when we put it in the entire mix, you'll really see what I'm talking about. So I'll turn this off and then turn it on. Listen to this difference. It is incredible. I mean, I love this the high frequency enhancer in this. And then we're just doing a very, very tiny bit of the listen mic compressor here, just to add a little bit of the kind of roomy sound to these cymbals, but I didn't want a ton. I don't want them to be real washy and just kind of ring out. Then from there we have the kick sum. So just kind of quickly listening to the kick sum. I'm gonna mute the verb because this also plays. So looking at what's going on here, I'll pull these up real fast. We have the SSL bus compressor, the Blacksall Audio low control and Blacksall Audio clipper. So let's take a look. So we're getting about maybe 2 dB of gain reduction on the bus compressor. This is really kind of just taming the sound and also adding a nice punch to it. These SSL bus compressors are really great at adding punch, especially to drums. So I've got that about 2 dB of gain reduction there. We are really reining in a lot of the sub frequencies here below 90 hertz with this low control and just adding a very touch of harmonic saturation. The reason it's only at 2% here is because I'm also adding harmonic saturation to the low end in the shells bus, which I just showed with the SSL drum strip plugin, so I didn't want to overdo it. And then the last thing is the Blacksall Audio clipper. Obviously, we have to clip the drums, especially in a metal, in a metal context like this. You want that harmonic saturation. It really helps add a nice attack to the kick. So check it out. Yeah, night and day difference there, especially if you're listening to the attack, that kind of clicky, the clicky attack on the top. It's night and day. You got to clip the drums. So then we're going to add in the reverb. So this is not a massive difference, but if I solo it, you'll really hear what this reverb sounds like, and it sounds really good. So So this is the Verb Suite Classics. You can see all the settings I've got going on there, but soloing this again and bypassing. It really adds a nice roomy sound to the kick, and I'm a big fan of a nice roomy kick. I don't want it to be too dry. So that is the the Verb on the kick. Going to the snare drum, we'll go ahead and pull up what's happening here, because this is probably the bus that has the most on it. So let me just pull everything up and we will walk through it. All right, so this is the Snare Sum Bus, and there obviously is a few things happening here. I can't even fit them all in the window right, so we'll just go like this. All right, so the very first thing is we have Slate Trigger 2. This is adding some additional samples in here. I will give you an idea of what they sound like. There are 4, I believe. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. These, this one, and this one are muted. Those are not being included in there. So those 4 samples are being blended together to make one sound, and that is going in at 40% of the overall snare sound. So if I turn this off, this is what all of the original snare tracks sound like without these 4 samples being blended in. Now if I add trigger back in, you're going to get these additional 4 samples blended with what you just heard. So there you go. It adds. I really like these snares. That this is a lot of these are the snares. I believe that all of them came with the Trigger 2 software itself. They're very punchy, and I love the sound of them. Again, I've got them blended in at 40%. So that is Trigger 2. Now the single plugin, which is making the biggest difference of my entire snare mix, is this plugin right here, and it's mainly this one. It's the FG Stress, the distressor emulation here. Listen to the night and day difference when I turn this off and back on. All of a sudden, it comes to life. It's got some nice sustain to it. It's not so boxy and just kind of transient sounding. It's night and day difference. And listen to it in the mix with just this one difference. Ready? So I'm gonna unsolo it in the entire mix here. I mean, it's just massive. That one plugin is kind of like the trick to bring the entire snare drum sound together. Just absolutely crushing it with the nuke, really kind of cranking the input, fast attack, fast release, slow attack, fast release, and that's mainly it. And then from there, we go into, what are we going into? Spiff, which is this here. It's just adding a little bit of bottom end. Then we go into the BSA clipper. Again, you got to clip these drums, especially in a metal context like this. So before and after. Oh yeah, huge difference there. You really get a lot more of that harmonic saturation. It kind of kills a little bit of the transient as well that's happening on this snare, so it's not so snappy, and you get a lot more of the saturation that just kind of smooths it out a little bit, and that transient doesn't hit quite so hard. So I really like the way it kind of rounds things off on the transient there. And then the Snare Sum EQ, we've just got a tiny bit being pulled back on the top end. And that is the Snare Sum. We are sending a little bit to the Snare Verb, so let's go ahead and listen to what the Snare Verb sounds like. And I'll pull these up. This is lustrous plates, and again, we've got the distressor and some EQ happening here. Now the compressor that I'm doing here, this isn't a ton, but it's just to add a little bit of sustain to these plates. Now it did have some decent sustain to it, but I wanted a little bit more, and I wanted it to be a little bit less just kind of reverby and more compressed. So we'll have a listen. Yeah, huge difference when you lose that reverb. You just lose kind of the open sounding, the spaciousness of the snare. You add it in and it just gets huge. So that's the snare and the snare verb. Then we go into the toms, and let me see, where do I even have a fill in here? It looks like maybe right here. That's basically it all for the toms in this. And then all we're really doing is some compression and clipping in here. That's basically it. So really not a whole lot more to go into there. We're sending that into the tom verb, so we'll listen to that. So let's see, we've got Verb Suite Classics and a little bit of Distressor. So there you go. And then the last bus is the room sum. This is all of the room mics. Anything that was mic'd as a room, that's the room mics themselves, which is the entire drum set, as well as any samples that I'm using that are room samples. And I do have a couple that are snares, possibly one that's kick. And those are coming in here. We're just kind of rolling off a little bit of the low end here. I don't want a lot of the low end in the rooms. And then we are probably heavily compressing the rooms here as well. Let's take a look. We're crushing the rooms. Let's solo this. Yeah, you can see we're absolutely crushing the rooms to kind of get rid of the strong transients, get rid of the boxy sounding, and just bring them to life, right? Like make them big and huge and add some sustain. So that's what's happening on the rooms sum. Let's take a quick look at the individual drum tracks now. All right, so this video doesn't turn into a 2-hour video. I'm gonna quickly run through what's happening here. And as you can see, there's really not a lot. So on the kick, we're just doing the Lindell. And in fact, the Lindell 50 series is literally on every single track across my entire drum bus. I just love the way this plugin sounds. It has hot swappable EQs and compressors. The noise gate works really well, so I've got it on all the drums. And so this is the kick. Then the snare, we've got Transgressor, again Lindell, and then what was the last one? Pro Q. Let's see what we're doing here. Okay, so let's just kind of quickly take a look at what's happening here. So the Transgressor 2, this is a transient designer, which allows you to split the transient and the sustain as far as adding EQ to it. So you can kind of see what I'm doing on the transient and the sustain. And if I bypass this, you'll really hear the difference here. So where this snare from GGD Invasion, which is what this snare is, this is a very transient, strong snare. There wasn't much sustain. So as you can see here, I'm pulling back the transient, boosting up the sustain. So let's turn this off and have a listen, and then I'll turn it back on. Huge, huge, huge difference there, right? So you lose quite a bit of the strong transient there, but you get some additional sustain. So that is Transgressor 2. Let's see, what do we got next? Now we have the Lindell. We're adding a bit of top end, losing a bit of the mud in the 700 hertz range and boosting at about 100 hertz to add some body beef to it. Let's see, I don't think we're doing it much compression. No, it's like mainly peaking at like negative 2 dB, so not much compression there. So that's the Lindell, and then this is pulling out a ringing frequency here at 308 hertz, pulling out a little bit of one at 209 hertz, and then boosting a little bit below the fundamental just to kind of add a bit more beef in here as well. So let's take a look at what's happening here. I'll solo these so you can hear it. So you can really hear that ringing frequency, and it was coming through pretty strong in the mix, so I had to dial that one back. I don't mind a ringy snare, but that one was just too much. I had to dial it back. From there, we have the Snare Bottom, and we'll just kind of pull this up. Probably not much happening. It's very similar, pulling out some of the 500 hertz. That's basically it, using the FET compressor on that one, just to kind of round off the transient, give it some sustain. Then let's see, we've got the toms. Looks like the only ones I was using in this song are Tom 2, 3, and 4 from Invasion. And let's see, we've got, here is the Lindell on Tom 2. the Lindell on Tom 3 and the Lindell on Tom 4. So there you go. You can see those. Take a screenshot if you want to look at it longer than that. Then we have the hi-hat. Take a look at what's happening here. Not a whole lot, pulling back some lows, a little bit of the 20 hertz, adding some air. We're adding soothe to kind of clear up any sort of harshness. So we'll take a look at this. Yeah, and there's not much hi-hat even happening in here, so it's really not doing much. So there is hi-hat. From there we have the ride, and I'll pull this up quick. There you can see pulling back a little lows, boosting up a little bit of the air. Not a whole lot on any of these, right? Like there's just not a lot happening here. So same exact thing there on the cymbals track. Then we have the overheads, pulling back some lows, pulling back around 800 hertz. Probably got some mud happening in this overhead track. And then, let's see the soothe too here. Let's see how much is pulling out of this. So that delta, that just kind of shows you what it's pulling out, and you could hear a little bit of that harshness that it was pulling out there. And then we have the rooms track, and almost nothing happening here. I think it's just some of the FET compressor. Let's solo it and see what all it's doing. Oh, it's not even on. It's not even on. So it's literally just doing a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of EQ, and that's basically it. All right, now we're getting into the sample tracks that I have here from Bogren Digital and the Middle Farms 4D Sound Studio stuff here. So we have the Bogren Digital kick, and you can see I'm not doing much on this, just pulling back some of the low end. And then the Bogren Digital snare that I'm using. And you can see not a whole lot happening there either. These just sounded good as is, not much really needed. And these samples, all the remaining drum tracks you're gonna see, I did not send these in the monthly mix. So if you got the tracks for the monthly mix and mixed it, you did not get these because this is part of my custom mix for this. And it wasn't like what I would consider, you know, like the drums, which is just straight out of GGD Invasion. Any additional samples I did not send. So these you did not get. All right, so then we have the 4D Sounds, the Middle Farm Studios snare. Good bit of EQ happening here, adding some 10 hertz. Let's see, we're adding some 5 kilohertz, or 10 kilohertz, adding 5 kilohertz, pulling back 500 hertz. And that's probably it, just a little bit of compression happening. And then we've got the BD snare room and the 4D snare room. So Bogren Digital snare room. We're pulling back the transient on this. I don't want a lot of the transient in the room. I just want the sustain. And then the Lindell 50 series, just a little bit of beef, pulling back some of the highs. Get rid of some of the sizzle there. And then the 4D sounds, again, pulling back some of the transient. I just want the sustain there. And again, pulling back some of the sizzle and some of the strong mid-range that this had at 500 hertz. All right, so that is all the drum tracks. Let's quickly solo the drums and hear what they sound like. All right, that is the drums. Let's move on to the guitars. All right, so guitars. As you can see, I mentioned before when we went through to the kind of the top level buses, there's nothing on the main guitars bus, but from within that, we have guitar effects, which has Pro Q3 and Valhalla Supermassive. So this is what's doing all of the beautiful kind of reverb and delay that's happening on the ambient guitar tone. We'll get to that in a minute. But these are the settings, and we'll kind of circle back on these. Then we have the guitar rhythms bus, and we'll pull this up real quick and see what's happening. So this EQ is not doing anything, so I'm just gonna turn it off. So we have a limiter here just to make sure no strong transient peaks kind of cut through around -4 dB. And then the first thing that's happening is we're just kind of boosting a little bit of saturation. We're boosting the mid-range between 250 hertz and just about 1100 hertz, 1.1 kilohertz. So this is just boosting some warm tape in there. We're not boosting the level, we're just adding some saturation with the warm tape, with that harmonic saturation that makes it sound louder. So that's what's happening there. And then for the actual rhythm tones, this was some pre-EQ. So this is we're pulling back some of the super lows below 30 hertz. Then we've got a low shelf at 200 hertz. This is negative 8.4 dB, pulling that down a lot. Because this is kind of tuned low anyways. I want to get rid of that low end before it hits the amp and then add it back after the amp, which you'll see in a minute. And then this really kind of boosting up around 7 dB at around 2000 hertz to add a lot of that mid-range in there, again, before it hits the amp, so that it saturates the way that I want in the amp, and then pulling back around 4100 hertz. And I'll solo this real quick so you can hear why I'm pulling this back a little bit. It's kind of the really harsh kind of where the pick attack happens, but it's just too much. So I'm gonna solo this guitar track. I'll make it up the middle and just kind of solo this cue so you can hear it. Yeah, you can see that's kind of the harsh area. So I just wanted to pull that back a little bit there. And then we go into Audio Assault's The Crown, which is absolutely incredible. This is based on the Mesa Boogie Triple Crown. I have a whole video on this. I'll put a link to it up in the corner as well, so you can go check it out. You can quickly see the settings I have here. We have the pedals starting with the gain staging. I've got the input boosted up to +3. We have the tube screamer on. We have the amp section. You can see there we're using the 6L6 tubes, the cab, and we're doing a little bit of post EQ here. And you can see what I was saying. I'm boosting up 1 dB on 125 hertz here after the amp, adding in a bit of air, pulling back a little bit of the kind of the muddy area in the mids. And that's basically what's happening here. So with that, let's go ahead and just have a quick solo of what the guitars sound like. Yeah, real nice and tight, not too much saturation. Again, because we pulled down a lot of that lows before it hits the amp, you've got a nice tight chug tone in there. So this sounds really, really good. From there, we've got the ambient tone. And so this one I was just using for tracking. We'll go ahead and turn that off, ignore that. Now we have the guitar leads. So on the guitar leads bus, just a tiny bit of compression happening here, just to kind of like leveling, if you will. And again, some safety, I've got a limiter here just to make sure nothing breaks across the threshold of negative 8.45 dB. And then we're sending this to the guitar effects. So let's go ahead and just kind of quickly solo and see what these ambient guitar tones sound like so that I can show you what's happening in the guitar effects bus. And so you can hear what I just soloed there at the end was just the guitar effects bus. And that is, we're carving out kind of this lower mid, upper mid range section without a lot of highs, without a lot of lows. That goes into Valhalla Supermassive with these settings here. And then you get this beautiful, beautiful ambient long reverby tone. Really, really great. I love that. So then we have the individual tracks here, and just quickly looking at these, we have similar to the rhythm tone, just not as harsh of an EQ. So that is the first thing that happens. Then we are really clipping these as well. I really wanted to just kind of add a lot of harmonic saturation here, even before it hit the amp. I just thought it sounded really good. So I've got this boosted up 16.7 dB and we're clipping at 14.5. So it's just clipping the hell out of these. And then it goes into Archetype Abasi from Neural DSP. And let's kind of quickly run through and see what we're doing here. We've got the pre-effects, we've got the compressor on, we've got the pathos on, and then we're going into the clean amp. We're blending this just a tiny little bit. See any post EQ? Okay, so a little bit of post EQ. You can see I'm using the Bogren Digital the almost gut lead IR, and no post of, oh, now let's see, we may have a little bit of the delay on here as well, just to add some of that, but that is what's happening on the ambient or lead guitar tracks. So let's have a quick listen to what all the guitars sound like in solo. All right, that's the guitars. Let's have a look at the bass now. All right, so the bass tracks, this one should be pretty quick. We've already gone through the bass bus earlier, so now let's just look at what's happening inside this. We have a bass DI track and we have a bass amped track. That's it. The bass DI is literally just the DI, but we are only allowing at about 211 hertz and below to come through. So soloing this, all you're gonna hear is the low end of the DI part of the bass. That's it. That's because I don't want that running through impulse responses or saturated or anything, just to really hold on to that low end beef of my bass. Then we go into where we saturate the hell out of it. And this is the opposite. We're allowing 200 hertz and up to come through. Then we're going into Mammoth. Absolutely incredible bass plugin, VST. I love this thing. I keep it on the middle drive setting. I forget what this is. I'll put the description down below. But I forget exactly what the bass amp is that this is on. But you can see all the settings I have here. I like the 610 IR, all these different settings. The HQ, I've got it rolled up. It's kind of hard to see behind the Mammoth logo, but you can see I've got it up to kind of just at the top of this tusk here on the left. The growl up a good ways, pulling the slam down, blending this all in at 70%. So do a quick before and after for you here. Soloing this part of the bass. Yeah, and like I said, we are saturating the hell out of this and it sounds so good. And then we go into the Lindell, and this is just pulling back a little bit of the mud around 500 hertz, just kind of clean, just kind of post cleanup EQ, if you will. And then if we put it all together, this is our bass tone. Sounds so thick, so good. So if we blend this now with the guitars, you can hear kind of as it starts to come together. And then when we hit this section here where we just chug, it just sounds so thick. So good. All right, so that is our bass. All right, so now let's have a look at the effects tracks and what we did here. So there's really only two. So let's see, there's this one and this one were the MIDI tracks. So these ones are the rendered ones that I sent as part of the monthly mix. So we have one called Fear and another one called Strength. And then, let's see, we also have a reverse cymbal and a boom. So kind of like your bass drop, right? So we'll just kind of listen through and see what's happening here with these. All right, so for the Fear track, let's take a look at what we did here. So Fear, you can see I'm running this to the Lindell, pulling back some of the top end, just a little bit at 500 hertz coming back. Let's see if we're doing any compression here. Not much, just around 2 dB, if that. And then we have the Strength. And then, let's see, it's pretty similar. We're pulling back a lot of lows below 300 hertz here. This must have had a lot of lows in it. Let's go ahead and just kind of solo this and see what this sounds like. And yeah, you can see even from the waveform of this sample from this synth, it's all over the place. So I really had to rein that in. You can see we're hitting like -8, possibly even -10 dB of gain reduction, and pulling back a lot of the lows. So I think a lot of these sections where it gets real loud, it was actually getting very subby and just kind of killing the low end of the mix. So I had to pull that back quite a bit. And then from there we have the reverse cymbal. I don't think there's much happening here. almost nothing. I'm just running it through the Lindell, and that's basically it. Just some leveling. I've got it back negative 2.9. And then the last thing is the sub drop, right? Like the boom, the bass boom here. So we've got the Lindell 50 series, and we're boosting up around 5K. And this is probably just to add a little bit of top end kind of clarity to when that hits, so that it's not just the low end. And let's see if we're doing any compressing on this. I am not compressing. Oh, it's even off. You can see, I'm not compressing it at all there. So then we have low control, and this is just adding some harmonic saturation, so it helps cut through on smaller speakers, and also it makes it sound bigger and fatter. And then we're doing some low end control here with the low end compressor. Upwards of almost 6 dB of gain reduction just on everything 90 hertz and below to rein in those sub frequencies so they don't get out of control and just completely just blow up my bus compressor and ruin the whole low end of the mix. And so you can see I've got this pulled back a good ways too. And let's see, that is the effects tracks. So let's move on to the synth. All right, so here we are. We've got the synth tracks up, and there's inside our main synth bus, which again, we've already gone over earlier, but inside here we have one send, we have the synth Verb, and this is also Verb Suite Classics. Basically the very similar settings to kind of what I'm using in other buses. You can see those are the settings there, and we'll go ahead and I'm gonna solo this synth Verb, and we'll just kind of do this section here so you can hear it. Absolutely beautiful. This super massive is free, and it is probably the best reverb plugin for the like effects like this that I possibly could have ever found. It is fantastic. Sounds so good. So that is the synth Verb. Then we have the strings. The strings bus. So this is a bus where the violin and the bass are being routed into, and all we're really doing here is some up end saturation to kind of help these strings cut through this mix, again with the warm tape. So we'll go ahead and we'll solo the strings and just see what this sounds like. Yeah, you can really hear how when I add Saturn in there, all that top end saturation helps these really kind of come through. And then from there we have the individual tracks, so the violin and the bass here and here. And so we're just doing some Lindell 50 series, and we're adding some top end air as I expected, pulling back some lows. See if we're doing much compression. So we're hitting at about negative 6 dB, just kind of leveling things pretty good. And let's see, that's the bass. And so here's the violin, adding more air, pulling back some lows. Let's check the compression here. Upwards of negative 8 dB as well. So just some good compression leveling there as well. And let's see, those are the strings. Then we have the choir. So this is the choir bus. Let's have a listen to what's happening here. I'll pull up these plugins so we can walk through these as well. This is the choir bus. All right, so it's very similar to the strings. We're adding some warm tape, some pretty strong saturation to the top end, and then we've got some bus compression happening. Maybe around negative 2 dB max, just to kind of tame any of the strong peaks. We're sending this, and again, the strings we're sending to the synth Verb. So that is the choir, and then from there we only have 2 tracks, this one and this one. And these are the renders I sent as part of the monthly mix. So again, if you mix it, you got these tracks. And then on the individual tracks, so on the women's choir, adding quite a bit of top end air, starting at, well, high end, not necessarily even air, but a high shelf, starting at 7K, boosting it up almost 9 dB. See if we're doing much compression here. About peaking negative 5, negative 6 dB. And then the men's choir, let's solo this one. And just kind of see what we've got going on here. And this comes in over here. about -4 dB, and then we're adding some top end air, and that's essentially it. And those are the synths. All right, and the last thing to walk through is the vocals. We've already walked through the vocal bus. I've already showed that and given you an example of how that worked earlier in the video. So we're just gonna dive into the individual tracks within the vocals bus. And we have a vocals verb 1, vocals verb 2, and vocals distortion. All of these are being sent individually from different tracks. And you can see what's all happening here across the different tracks, and we'll get to those in just a minute. In the vocals verb 1, we have some de-essing, and then we go into Verb Suite Classics, and you can see the settings there. And see, the verb 1, I believe, is actually happening on the bus itself. Let's see, vocal verb 1, yes, right there. So this vocal verb here is actually being sent to from the bus, and then from here we're going directly to vocal main, so we don't end up with a loop going back into the bus. So this just goes all the way out to main, which I showed very early on in the video. But that's where all the final vocal tracks go, is into vocal main. And then from here, let's see, we've got, so that's the vocal verb 1, then vocal verb 2. This is kind of used for an effect in places where I want a long kind of reverby, nice delay sound to kind of ring out when there's pauses in vocals and things like that, to add a huge vocal sound, right? And again, it's the exact same thing I've shown many times. So there's the pre-EQ, and then we go into Valhalla Supermassive. You can see these are the settings I've got there. Let me see if I can find you an example of this. And it's going to be easy to tell when we get into the automation view of the vocals, because I automate the hell out of these reverb and the distortion sends, so that I can change things up and add stronger reverbs near the end of vocal parts and things like that, so that they ring out. So let's see, send 2 right here. So here's an example of what this verb sounds like. So yeah, you can hear that's just a long reverb. It's not too bright, but it's a nice mid-rangey. It's not too much lows, just a long drawn out reverb. And so listening to a quick example of this reverb effect with this long drawn out reverb on a vocal part, let's have a listen to what it sounds like on the vocals, and then I'll mute it so you can hear the difference, and then we'll put it in context in the mix, and you'll really hear the massive difference. So this is with it.
Was lost.
You can really hear how that long drawn out reverb helps it kind of fade out into the next vocal part. Whereas if I take it off, listen to the difference.
Was lost.
It just completely stops and cuts out, right? So let's have a listen to that in context in the entire mix without this vocal part, without this reverb, and listen to how it just cuts off, and then I'll add it in. Right? Like again, you hear it, just the vocal cuts out and then it comes back in. Now listen to it with this reverb effect. So right there, it's not a super in your face thing, but it's subtle, but it's there enough to kind of help those vocals ring until it comes in again. So it's the subtle automation on these reverb sends that really makes all the difference. So that is the vocal verbs 2. You've already heard vocal distortion. I'll just solo it real quick so you can hear it again. Distorted vocals, that's it. And it's basically all coming from Saturn II. We're really saturating above about 192 hertz. We're doing the broken tube, really pushing it hard. And that's because this is being sent not as 100% from the individual vocal track. So I just really push it hard here and then just send however much I need to send from the individual tracks. All right, now walking through the individual vocal tracks. The first thing I want to point out is the ones that you can see that have the disabled plugins on them. That's where I did all of my kind of editing, if you will. So I have some Vocal Line Ultra on here, which just helps align multiple vocal tracks so that they don't sound like they're different when you pan them, right? Like you want them to kind of align so that, especially when you're panning things, or even if you're not panning things, you don't want it to sound like they're not aligned properly. So I use Vocal Line, first of all, before I mixed anything, to align everything. So what you got were the aligned, the edited versions. But before I did that, you know, there was a little bit of alignment issues. Joey is very solid. He does sing a lot of the parts almost perfectly aligned. Just very, very, very minor things here and there. I ran it through Vocal Line to fix those minor, those subtle differences. So from there, looking at the individual mixing that I did on these, and again, you're gonna see, you can already see, there's not much on the individual tracks, right? Because of what I'm doing on the bus with the mag EQ, adding the air, pulling out the 650 hertz, the mud frequencies, adding saturation, compression with the Vocal Line Ultra, or not Vocal Line Ultra, the Waves Vocal Rider, and then the MC77, I don't need to do a lot on the individual tracks. The main thing that you'll see is a little bit of air being added, a little bit of the mids being pulled out, a little bit of the lows maybe, but then I'm using the FET compressor here on certain tracks and really kind of pushing it harder on some than others. So this one doing max dB, a max gain reduction of about negative 10 dB or so. And that's essentially it across all these tracks. I'll just quickly pull them up and you can see they're all almost identical. So far those two have been the exact same. That one's the exact same. Exact same. I'm just gonna skip further ahead here. See, I think they're literally all the exact same. Because they were all very similar as it is. I didn't need to do a lot of different stuff. And this one a little bit more mids maybe. But that's basically it. Let's just kind of take a look at see what kind of gain reduction and all that's happening here on one of these.
There is no salvation!
Yeah, so I mean you can see the FET compressor here. I mean it was going about -4, -6, something like that. But that's essentially it. So there's really not a lot happening on the individual tracks. That is it. Just the Lindell, a little bit of the FET compressor in there, a little bit of EQ. But then we are sending, let's see, we are sending vocals distortion, probably on basically all of these. Some of them are blended in higher than others. Like this one's at -11. This one's up to -5.2, and this is all automated as well. So if we look through this automation window up here, you can see how I've got the volume automations happening where fade outs need to happen. During verses where there's not as many vocal tracks, I've got it up higher, whereas when there's multiple, all these different tracks happening in kind of the chorusy sections, if you will, I'm pulling some of them down to boost other ones up to kind of reorient certain things where I want them. And then there's all sorts of additional, let's see if we expand some of these here. You can see all the different automation that's happening. And this is really where I took the most time in this mix, was these finishing automations. And you can see, like, I mean, there's just tons of them, right? So volume sends to the Vocal Verb 2 to add the ring outs. Sends to adjust the vocal distortion in certain spots to make it stronger or lighter in certain areas. So just kind of quickly running through, you can see all these. I'm even panning things differently in certain spots, but it's all this automation that really makes the biggest difference. And there's no real perfect way for me to just say, like, this is how you're supposed to automate. You kind of have to just learn how to hear these things. And utilize the tools that you have, like these great reverbs to add, the ring outs in between vocal sections, add emphasis during choruses to certain vocal tracks, or make certain things wider in the choruses, right? So like you can increase the pan during your choruses, which is exactly what I'm doing here. So you can see I'm panning from 30% to 55 or 30 to 55 in the choruses. So in the verses it's 30, and then in the verses it's 30, and the choruses it goes to 55 to make everything wider. So that's that way it sounds bigger. So that's basically what I need to show for the vocal tracks. Let's get rid of the automation. So that's essentially it. The last thing I'll just quickly go through, because it was included in the reference track, is kind of the mastering chain that I ran this through here. And this is starting with the Pulsar Massive, a newish plugin to me, but I've been wanting a Manly Massive passive EQ for a long time. These things are like $10,000, so I will likely never own an actual hardware unit. So when I saw this plugin was released, I was thrilled and jumped on it immediately. And I have this in mid-side mode, so the left is the mid, the right is the sides. So you can see what's happening on the mids is we're doing some low end boost, just a tiny bit of upper end boost in the mids as well. On the sides, we're pulling down the lows on these sub frequencies. I don't need that on my sides. We have a little bit of boost happening on the third gain, the third Q here, which is set to mostly a shelf. And then number 4 here is my air band. We're starting at about 14K and then boosting this upwards of almost 10. And this is just kind of adding some air on the sides where, you know, we've got the cymbals, we've got guitars, things like that, to add some nice air to this as well. And then from there, we're going into the Black Box HG2. This is also mid-side mode, so you can see the top is the mid, the bottom is the sides. We're doing about 200 hertz and up or so on both of these, just adding some decent saturation here, pushing the pentode a little bit harder on the mids, pulling it so I have to pull back the output a little bit more, but that way it also makes the sides just a little bit more prominent, just to kind of add a bigger sound. Then we have Ozone, and I'm just doing some match EQ with one of my favorite reference tracks, which is The Blade by Scion. The low end on this is some of the best I've ever heard, so I always kind of do some match EQ here to kind of try to get some of the similar low end that they've got going on. And then have some dynamic split band dynamics here, multi-band dynamics happening, multi-band compression. And then the last thing is my clipper, which is just flatline. You can kind of quickly see the settings that I've got there. And that's basically kind of the quick mastering chain that I ran this through. The IO plugin is just so that you can hear it in this video. I've got it routed out into OBS so you can hear it. So that's basically the only reason it's there. And that's it, folks. That is it. That is the mix. This has been a super long video. And if you're still watching, I thank you for sticking around this long, and I hope maybe this was helpful and maybe you learned something in this. If you have any questions, hit the comments down below and leave those questions there. Of course, you can always jump in the Discord server. I'm in there. I'm very active in there. There's a lot of other great folks in there who are active that can help answer your questions about anything mixing or mastering you have. We're always talking about guitar tones and new music and, of course, mixing and all of that. So find the invite to the Discord down in the description below. We'd love to have you come join us there. Sign up for monthly mix. It is absolutely free. There is no excuse or no reason not to if you are seriously interested in practicing mixing. We get a new song, all the raw multi-tracks for a new song every month, so find the link to sign up for that down below. Again, it is free. There is no cost. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and just wrap up this video right there. I wanna thank you for watching this extremely long video. And with that, hit the subscribe button down below if you want to see more like this in the future. And as always, thank you for watching and thank you for your support.